and welcome to the Kruze Consulting free venture capital and startup pitch deck creation course. This course guide is designed to help founders put together the perfect pitch deck to raise venture capital funding. I'm Healy Jones, and I'm joined by Haya Camps. I am the leader of FP&A here at Kruze Consulting. Kruze is one of the leading CPAs focused on venture capital-backed startups. Our clients have raised over $6 billion in venture capital funding, and it's my job to help them get ready to raise funding with a particular focus around making sure their numbers are telling the story. To get the other way to tell the story, which is through the presentation, I've brought on one of the leading pitch deck consultants in Silicon Valley, Haya Camps. Haya, do you want to quickly tell us about yourself?
Yes, hello. My name is Haya, and I have had all sorts of weird career moves over the years. I'm a multiple startup founder. I've raised a bunch of capital. I was in venture capital for a bit, and I am now a reporter at TechCrunch. So I've kind of seen the venture capital world from lots of different angles. After I left venture capital, I discovered that the most fun things I know how to do is to help founders tell their stories. So I started blogging about that, started consulting, and actually ended up writing a book about that called Pitch Perfect. It came out last year. It looks an awful lot like this. And basically, it's a guide for how to think about building a perfect pitch and how to get a really good story behind the mechanics and the storytelling of getting across what your startup does to a venture capitalist.
Excellent, Haya. Well, you are the best person in Silicon Valley to help us with this. Your clients have raised hundreds of millions of dollars. I've been fortunate enough to work with founders who have raised probably over $1 billion at this point. And additionally, I was a venture capitalist in the past with Summit and Atlas, and have been at startups that have raised quite a bit of money, including one that went public. So definitely have the battle scars to have proven that I've done this before. And I really enjoy working individually with founders and startups as they're getting ready to raise capital. But I think this is a great way for us to help many founders all at once. This is designed to be an entire course, which we're going to offer for free on kruzeconsulting.com/pitch-deck. That's kruzeconsulting.com/pitch-deck. And we also will have 2 free templates, which are a B2C company and a B2B company that you're free to grab their Google Slides. We also link out to some other pitch decks that really love. Airbnb, Uber, Mattermark. We have quite a few that we've seen that have been great, and they're wonderful resources for you to take a look at as you think through. During this course, we're going to go through each slide and talk to you about what the strategy is behind the slide, how it tells the story, how you weave the story together between the slides. I'll talk about some of the common mistakes we've seen when we were investors and things that are kind of trip you up in the process or can make the VC kind of pause. And so you'll be able to access all of these as videos on YouTube. We intend to do it as a podcast. And again, it will also all be available in written content on the Kruze Consulting website. Before we actually walk through the order of the slides and talk a little bit about what should go in each slide, I want to kick it over to Haya to talk about the story that you're trying to tell and how you weave that into the narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a really fun thing that happens when you sit across from somebody and you have to kind of paint a picture of the world you want to live in. You are sitting across from somebody who might potentially give you millions of dollars to help that reality become real. And it means that you have to have a little bit of pizzazz behind the story you're telling. Now, when I say storytelling, it doesn't mean make stuff up. It means having a structured narrative that can help pull all the different parts of your presentation together. What that typically means is having examples that can be used as you work your way through the various slides. It's like a red thread that runs through everything. It also means that you can use storytelling techniques to kind of, set something up and then pick it up later, or later on refer back to something in your story. And thinking about your story like kind of a multidimensional being like that is really helpful. So that's all fun and fancy and all, but really what all of this is in aid of is to make sure that the venture capitalist remembers you, and that they walk away with the salient points about why your company might be worth investing in. And the things you are really telling the story about is, why is this venture scale? Why is this investable? Why is this a good idea? Why now? Like, what is the macroeconomic system around all of this? Why you? Why you the perfect founder to actually go and do this? And why this? Like, why is it important to do exactly what you're doing right now? And why is this such a good opportunity? And all of these pieces will come up again and again as we go through this course and talk about the various slides and how to tie them all together. And it's one of my favorite things. So I can't wait to share all of this with you.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the things that I've appreciated as we're preparing this course is the importance of story and how you can be strategic as a founder. To double click on that, one of the things that I remember as a VC being really impactful are when a founder can mention particular clients and their pain points and how their solution solved them, how they've retained the client for a long time, how the client has started to spend more money with them as they're growing, how the client chose them over the competition. These are very specific kind of examples of a client success that can be mentioned on multiple pages in the pitch deck and can really help the VC be able to repeat that story. Right. And that kind of leads into what's the purpose of the pitch deck. So the first purpose of the pitch deck is to get a meeting. It's often that the VC is going to ask for the deck via email generally before even wanting to take a meeting. So that it's got to be able to stand on its own when it's just an attachment in an email coming in kind of cold. Okay, so that's the first thing it needs to do. The second thing that it needs to do is it's got to get them focused and get their attention and keep their attention during the meeting. Right. So you want them to be engaged. You got to get them to put down their phone and focus on you, ask you important questions. It's you guide them and keep them focused with the pitch deck. And then the third thing is, I think where that story really comes in, you have to remember most venture capital firms are partnerships. And so you have different investment partners or maybe even junior associates and investors who interact with each other. Now, pre-COVID, it used to be in the hallway. I can specifically remember in the hallway by the coffee pot, there was a particular investor I used to spend a lot of time with, right? Because we both loved espresso, so we'd be talking there together. And so if the deck has helped tell a story and helped drive a story into that investor's mind, when they are talking with one of their partners or investing partners or one of their investors called limited partners, they can repeat that story back and it can really drive the message home and help them remember you and remember why your company is exciting and why they want to invest. Right.
Yeah.
So
there's a really good parallel here too. It's like the difference between brand and branding. Branding is the information you put out there, and the brand is what others say about you. So you're in effect, the deck is your branding. This is your chance to tell your part of the story. But the thing that sinks in and kind of the phrases people use and the way they describe you, that becomes your brand within this fundraising cycle. And so the like at the coffee pot, they go, oh yeah, that company that does the thing. What they say there, this is your chance to plant that seed and make your story part of the way they talk about your company.
Exactly. And I've definitely seen moments where if you have particularly if you have a client that the investor knows of or is a brand name, like if Uber is using your technology or if a major hospital is using your technology, like those are little mentions that if you drive it through your narrative really well, can definitely stick in the investor's mind and they can be very impressed and they can say, oh my gosh, I just talked to this company that's selling to Coca-Cola and Uber and they're doing this. And I'm very excited about them. Like that's, you gotta try to inception style plant the awesomeness of your company inside their mind. And the deck is a vehicle that helps you do that. It helps you tell the story and get those things across.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So wonderful. So we just talked about, you've got to kind of get their attention with the deck and you've got to use it in the meeting and you've got to tell the story. Now, the venture capital industry is interesting. There's particular dances that happen in the VC industry, and it's probably partially the reason why it's such a sort of exclusive industry in kind of a bad way where certain groups have more challenges getting into it just because there's a particular way that VCs are used to interacting. And your slide deck, your pitch deck, and the order of the slides and the topics that you present that's part of the dance, right? And so we're here trying to help you understand the dance. And so what we're going to do is we're going to show you the sort of a standard list of the slides that go into your pitch deck and a standard order. Now there's going to be caveats where you change the order up, and we're going to talk about how and why you do that. Okay, but first let's show the order here. Now, as we've mentioned, we have created sample pitch decks that you can get on our website. And again, these are 4 companies that we made up. We're actually not trying to raise money for these companies. They're intended to be slightly funny. So don't judge us on what the companies are. We want you to look at the content and the order and how the story is presented. Okay, so I'm going to share with you the very standard order or list of slides. Now, because we are, you can certainly read this if you're looking on YouTube, because we're also going to release this in a podcast format. I'm going to do the thing we don't recommend during a presentation. I'm going to read the slide because visuals are not great for podcasts. So the order of slides that we recommend are a cover slide, the problem slide, the solution and or product slide, a market or market size slide, a team slide, a traction slide, a go-to-market slide, which can potentially sometimes be merged with the traction, but not always, competition slide, an operating plan, financial projections, and a closing slide. Okay, so those are the typical slides that we recommend. What we'd love to do is dive into a specific example that we put together. It's called a company called 4Ps. Again, you can get this free pitch deck template off of our website. And what this company is doing. Heidi, do you want to quickly talk about what this company is, just to set the table there for that?
Yeah, so we made up a company that is essentially a plumbing SaaS platform to help plumbers get more business and to run their businesses. It's the slogan for it is less admin, more plumbing, and the idea is to essentially show what the story could be for a company like this.
Exactly. So I'm going to jump back and forth between a visual of the slides in their order and then the actual slides. And in this part of the course, we're going to briefly touch on each slide. Again, we have entire 20-minute to hour-long discussions that we're recorded and we're releasing on each individual slide. So if you really want to dive in on an individual slide, or you have the time and interest, you can watch all of them in order. We'd love it if you did that. We'd love to get your feedback on it as well. But again, here is the order for the 4Ps, okay? And the intro slide. So Haya, let's talk about the intro slide. It is a missed opportunity, I would say, for many founders.
Yeah, a lot of the time, remember the context, right? So people show up to a meeting, they're kind of waiting for things to start. This is your chance to set the theme, explain what kind of industry you're in, summarize what you're doing, or, pull people in somehow. If it just says a logo of your company, you're kind of missing an opportunity there. So it's a really good idea to set the scenes, set up the narrative and stuff like that. And it's a good idea to kind of, explain what you're doing. Are you B2B? Are you B2C? Are you a SaaS company? What stage are you? How much revenue do you have? Anything that can help kind of position this in time and space is really valuable on this slide.
So I love the one-liner that we have on here, which is Salesforce for plumbing, Uber for X. These type of taglines that are pretty easy for the investor to understand your business model and who you're trying to service are really powerful. So I strongly recommend them. And just the biggest problem I would say I see early in the presentations is that you reach the third slide and nobody knows what you do yet.
Yeah.
Right. So this is your opportunity to hopefully make it pretty clear, at least at a high level, what your business model is and who you're targeting.
Yeah. And I think that's what that slide is really helpful for.
Exactly. So the next slide is the problem slide. Okay. And on the 4Ps here, the problem that is trying to be addressed is the admin overhead that plumbers have. Again, it's less important what this company is actually doing and more important to talk about the strategy behind the slide. Haya.
Yeah, I mean, here's your chance to really explain why this is a problem worth solving. And hopefully that this is a problem that people are willing to pay money to solve, right? It has to be compelling and interesting enough so the VCs understand, hey, there's a real market here. This is a problem that is worth solving and I should take a closer look. A lot of the time, especially if you're deep in an industry, it might be tempting here to get a little bit too inside baseball, and I think it's a little challenging if you make it non-obvious what the problem is. So spell it out, don't make any assumptions, and make it as easy as possible to understand, like A, that this is a problem worth solving, and B, that this is a problem that a lot of people experience.
Right. So think about the purpose of your deck again. It's been emailed to a venture capitalist. If they're going to open it, hopefully, and they're going to look at the first slide, and then this is the second slide. Now, this is the moment where you've got to make sure they're still going to pay attention here. Okay. So this slide needs to be compelling enough for them to want to take a meeting. They've got to get it. It can't be too confusing, too jargony, as you said, too inside baseball. And then when you think about when you're actually in the meeting with the venture capitalist, what does your startup need to get across here? You've got to get the excitement going about why this is a legit problem and that there's real customers out there who have this, and it's a big enough market. Okay. So again, biggest issue, too inside baseball or not making it obvious or crystal clear. So next, we recommend a solution slide, which if you think about through your narrative, you're just talking about a problem and then a solution. So we'll take a quick look at the solution side.
Yeah, the solution slide really is pretty straightforward, right? So I wouldn't spend too much time here. It's very tempting to dive into this. As a founder, you spend a lot of time on your solution. It's your product, it's whatever you're doing. But really, you just need to show that you have a solution to the problem you have outlined. Remember that really high quality founders are also able to pivot. So I wouldn't get too married to your specific solution, but what you're really saying is like, hey, this is the problem space, and here's what we're doing so far to give a solution to our customers. Now, there's a few different ways of solving this. Some people use a solution slide, some people use a product slide. You can use either, you can use both. It's just kind of whatever flows best for your narrative.
Right. And so in this particular example, we actually have dedicated a few slides to this. We dive into a specific thing that this app is doing that is unique to this industry. It definitely has a buzzword in here, which is AI. People still like investing in AI companies. And then we actually have a demo as well. I would say that the biggest issue I see on this slide is it becomes a list of features.
Yeah.
And then the second biggest issue I see is that this demo can become way too in-depth. Hey, then you click here, then you click here. Just remember the purpose. This is not a sales call where you're trying to sell your product. Okay, this is you are trying to excite an investor to purchase a piece of your business and to come along with you for an 8 to 10 year journey. So don't sell, don't list features, list the benefits. And then additionally, the other thing that's really important here is that this slide will vary by the stage of your company. So you could be pre-developing your product. So this will talk about how you anticipate fixing the client needs. However, if you're Series B, Series C, it's going to get a little more tactical around what you've actually done and where you're going and product roadmap. And then, but again, focusing on why it matters and how it's helping solve customer pain point, unlocking revenue potential and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. So after sort of the demo, and again, your demo better be super tight if you're doing a demo. If you're spending more than 5 minutes in a demo, you're doing something very wrong.
Yeah. I mean, in general, I would recommend to not do demos during the first pitch.
I agree with that.
But you know, it's whatever. If the product is very unique, especially if you do something with hardware, it's really nice to just be able to hold it up so people can see it's a real thing. Like that's often enough. Like, hey, here's the thing. I can show it to you more later, but it exists, right? If you're doing a SaaS solution, just having a screenshot is often enough, so people get a little bit of a vibe for what it looks like, what kind of features you can deliver, and the kind of things you do. That's often enough in a first pitch. And then later on, they'll probably double click deep on both the financials and the product itself in subsequent meetings. But you don't have to spend time on the first one too much.
If your startup pitch is compelling enough, there'll be plenty of time to go into demos.
Yeah. Exactly.
So don't over rotate on that.
Yeah.
So in the slide deck, next thing we have is the market size slide.
Yeah.
And I actually like the way we've done this slide. There are many different ways to do it. The design on this one, though, actually is something that I like quite a bit. Hayat, let's talk about what the purpose of this slide is.
Yeah, the market size and the market trajectory. I like in this particular example, I've lumped those two together. But basically, I think the importance of this is showing that there is a big enough market to sustain a business that's big enough to be worth investing in. It's really that simple. Like often it's done as a TAM, SAM, SOM. We talk about this in great detail in the market portion of this course. But it's a really powerful way to show that, hey, you might not have thought about this market so much, but it's huge and it's worth addressing. If you manage to ram that home and just basically say, hey, there is space for a multi-billion-dollar company in this space, and we think it's going to be us, that's really the only point you have to get across here, I think.
Yeah. Is this a venture scale business? The other point that I think is you should constantly be making incredibly clear to the investor is that you understand the market dynamics and you understand the customer pain points. And this is another opportunity to make it super obvious how you understand this market, perhaps help the VC sort of shift their thinking a little bit to realize like, hey, I thought this was already being solved, or I had never thought about this, but wow, there's definitely a lot of individuals, companies, corporations, whatever out there who are having this problem. This is a legit market. This is pretty interesting to me, right? So again, capturing their attention, telling the story about how you really understand the market and the clients. That's what this slide is trying to do.
Yep.
So next in this deck, we have a business model slide. Now, this is not the order that we just recommended to you. And in fact, when we are kind of done walking through these slides, we're going to compare the order of the different slides so you can understand some of the strategy behind how they're different. But in this 4Ps, we're going to the business model slide next. Haya, what is this slide?
So I think there's an interesting, it's actually a narrative device in this particular case, because if you look at the next slide, if we go slightly forward, yeah, the next one is the sales and go-to-market slide. But in the narrative for this particular startup, I was like, wait a minute, we can start talking about how we do sales and how we go to market, but unless the investor understands what the business model is that underpins all of this, this doesn't make as much sense. And I think this is a really good way of illustrating that sometimes, there is the standard 10 or 11 slide deck that everybody kind of knows about and that we recommend. But in addition, you are kind of in service to your story. And if your story doesn't make sense with the standard order of slides, you can change it. And in this particular case, what we did was that before we go and talk about sales to go to market, we had to talk about the business model, because there's some complexities here about the different tiers in the SaaS model, about the additional revenue streams and that kind of thing. And in order to really explain what the go-to-market is and how we do market expansions and that kind of thing, it is helpful to explain this part of it. Now, in some businesses, you don't have to do that. In other businesses, you can just roll it into either your market or your product, where you say on the product slide, oh yeah, we do this and that, and it costs $20 per month. Super straightforward. If it gets a little bit more complex, spend a little bit more time on it. That's perfectly fine.
Exactly. Perfect. So here we've got the business model and then the sales and go-to-market. The go-to-market slide is, I would say, pretty important for companies that are in the SaaS space, crypto space, hardware space, much less important for biotech companies because go-to-market is just not how you think about it, right? But for a company that you're going to be generating sales soon or you're already generating sales, this is an incredibly important slide.
Yep.
And the whole thing you're trying to talk about here is where your customers going to come from, right? And the corollary with the previous slide is kind of how you're going to make money. So again, on some presentations, you can kind of where your customers come from and how you make money are tied together. And in this particular instance, we decided to break it apart just to provide a little bit more detail.
The thing people often get wrong here is not having a clear enough vision of how they're actually going to reach their customers, right? And that kind of makes a lot of sense, because in the early days of a company, you're probably really focused on building the product, and you haven't necessarily thought that much about the specific mechanics for how to go to market and how to get sales. That's going to be a problem by the time you talk to a venture capitalist, because they want to know that not only can you build the product, you can also market it and get people to pay for it. And so that's really the part of the story that this tells. If you have a reasonably believable story here, we say, hey, we know what it costs us to acquire a customer, we know the channels we're going to use, and we know how we're going to balance all of that, and it works from a financial point of view, that makes the whole problem kind of go away. They just go, okay, ticks the box, we know how to do this, move on.
So this slide becomes a lot more numbers oriented and perhaps even tactical as your company advances in stage, becomes more mature. Yep. So when you are a more mature company and you have sales and marketing channels that are working and you have customer acquisition costs that you can calculate, you'll put those things on here. And what you're basically doing is you're telling the VC, I know what I'm doing. Here's what we're doing. Here's how we're going to grow it. So at the later stage companies, more detail. Earlier stage companies, particularly ones that haven't launched yet, what the venture capitalists are trying to do is they're trying to evaluate the credibility or how realistic you are in how you're going to acquire customers. A great way to talk about that prior to you actually having launched or started to get traction is to understand what other companies have done that are either competitors or who have similar business models that target similar clients, and talk about how you're going to discover it, right? So this page becomes less of here's what we've done and what's working, and more of this is our process or our strategy for figuring this out.
Yeah. And it's like, so again, this becomes a place where you say either this is how we've done it and we're just going to do more of it, or this is our playbook and we know how to do it. The one thing you don't get away with is like, we have a great product. If you build it, people will come because you'll be laughed out of the room. And right. That's the end of the conversation.
Right. Exactly. So if you don't know, talk about how you're going to have a process to get there. Yeah. So that's probably the biggest issue that I've seen. The second biggest issue is where you have something that's just not realistic or doesn't mesh or isn't like a coherent strategy, right? So if everything you've sold has had to be, you have to get on the phone or go in-person meeting and close the deal yourself, that probably means you need to have a sales team as you grow, right? So you shouldn't anticipate what's called product-led marketing, where people just kind of click and sell if everything to date has had to actually have a salesperson involved or yourself as a salesperson, right? So just make sure you're being kind of consistent with what you think is going to happen with what has happened, or if there's going to be a big difference, there needs to be a strategy. You need to be able to articulate why that's going to change.
Yep.
Great. All right, now let's go to the competition slide. One of my ultimate favorite slides. I love competition slides. I love it when companies have competition. Haya, what is the deal with the competition slide?
This is one of my favorite slides relatively recently. It's actually happened in the course of making this course for people. The competition slide is your chance of saying, how do you fit in the market? It gives you a chance to show both that you understand the playing field. That is crucial. Like if there's a major obvious competitor here that isn't on this list, it shows that you're not a believable founder. The other piece is that you can really explain, like this is your chance to kind of set yourself into a market against your competitors. And if you have a good, compelling narrative here, that really helps set the tone for the rest of the conversation. If you have a very strong competitor, for example, in this particular case, Salesforce, right? We're saying we're Salesforce for plumbing. Well, Salesforce is kind of a competitor. You can build a plumber tool around Salesforce, perfectly doable. But the value add, the thing that 4P adds is so specific and so helpful to this business that alone is a competitive advantage. And using your competitive landscape slide to talk about that and to kind of explain what the strengths and weaknesses are of your competitors and how you are different is just such a beautiful way to tell part of your story. It also invites really lively conversation a lot of the time.
So the biggest mistake I see is where a company doesn't think they have competitors. Right. That's.
I mean, we talk about this at great length in the actual competition.
But yeah, this is again, this is one of our best discussions. I would highly recommend you check out the competition slide recording that we have put together for this course.
Yeah, that one was really fun.
It's a great slide. You need to have the slide. It's an important slide. You show the VC. This is a real market. There's real competitors out here. And hey, Salesforce, SAP, like those companies are acquisitive. Like who doesn't want to have someone as a possible acquirer that could spend billions of dollars on your startup? Holy cow, that's amazing, right? So this is a strong slide to do really, really well.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, the order in this deck is particular. We've got the team slide almost buried a little bit. And when we talk about how to adjust the order, we'll talk about kind of why that's the case. But here's the team slide. Like, what is the purpose of the team slide?
The team slide basically shows that it depends a little bit on the size of the company, right? But if you are a early stage company, the question becomes, are the founders believable? Do I believe that the people who are about to go and build this company can pull it off and make something magic happen? And so really it's just, are you like, do you have a competitive advantage in some way? If you have a PhD in this field and you're cutting edge there, great. If you own patents, fantastic. If there's something about you and your network, like for example, you've been in this industry for 25 years, you know every mover and shaker here and they love you, that all becomes super important advantages to you as a business. And this is your chance to tell that story. Like, why are you the right people to do this particular company? And in my mind, kind of the other side of that is, if you were to give this slide deck to founders who are not you and they can go build the company, then that's a little worrying, right? There has to be something special about you and how you think and how you work and who you are to make you a really good founding team. In later stage companies, it becomes more about, are you good at hiring? Can you surround yourself with the right people to build this company in a way that nobody else could do? And can you attract the right talent?
And this slide is definitely one of those slides that you move around in the slide deck based on how powerful your slide is or your team is.
Yep.
So again, we'll talk a little bit more about kind of when to move these around, but this is definitely the slide that I think gets moved around the most in the deck, depending on who the people are.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. And then here we have an operating plan slide, which is a fun slide, particularly for Kruze Consulting, because we help our clients put together these projections quite a bit. Another one I like. One of the big things that this slide is doing is you can see that it's basically kind of that's 18 to 24 months of what you expect the company to do in terms of performance, both financially and from other key performance indicators, other KPIs. Right. This slide helps you justify how much you're raising because you say where you're spending it and you say what you're going to look like when you're done.
Yep. So
every VC is going to look at your deck or look at your company. And we talk about this a lot. And when we talk about the financial model, they want to know if they give you $5 million, $20 million, what does the company look like when you're next raising money? Have you created something that's dramatically more valuable? Are you going to be able to attract capital? So for this slide, you're trying to make sure that you understand what metrics you need to look like in order to be successful in unlocking that next fundraise. You need to understand sort of what your valuation or value creation milestones are that you're going to basically unlock as you spend this money and grow. And you're justifying the round size. You're explaining why you need $8 million or $20 million. That's what this slide is doing here, right? I think the biggest issue that Haya and I have seen here is where there's just not enough progress or traction as the company runs out of money. So sometimes that's because founders don't feel like they can raise a lot. So they say they only want to raise 2 million when they really need 8, right? So sometimes it's just because the clients are being, like, the startups are being too conservative. But
yeah, I think the thing this really needs to answer is, like, when you get to the end of this particular slide or the end of this particular timeline, if you do everything that you promise on this thing, can you raise your next round? And this is so there's two sides to that, right? Is it realistic that you can do all those things? And two, if you do all those things, can you raise money? If either of those aren't clearly answered on this slide, you're probably going to struggle to raise money, because it shows that you haven't thought ahead far enough to know what happens when you raise your next round of funding. And so really what you're putting in front of somebody is like, okay, we're going to raise so many millions of dollars. At the end of this, we will have $3.6 million of annual recurring revenue. Our team size will be 45, and we have 2,500 customers. Does that sound like a place where we can raise 15 million? Those numbers sound pretty good to me. So you'll probably get 2 thumbs up, and that is the end of this conversation, essentially. So it's a really good place to tell that part of the story through numbers.
Exactly. Got to remember, again, venture capitalists is constantly thinking, what does this company look like when it runs out of money? Will it be able to raise the next round? You're proving to them here that you've got a plan, and you're going to be very attractive to the next round of investments.
And not to state the super obvious here, the only thing that will kill your company is running out of money. And as this, everything else you can work with. If the market shifts, fine. If a massive competitor comes in, great. If your product is wobbly and doesn't launch properly, that's okay too. You can fix that. If you run out of money, it's game over. And so really you're showing here that as the CEO of this company, and as the founder, and as somebody who's financially savvy, you're not going to let that happen.
Excellent. And so the next slide that I love is the financial projection slide. Now, sometimes a company doesn't need this if they've got the operating plan. But the big reason I love this financial projection slide is because it goes out 3 to 5 years. And you're proving to the VC that you're playing the game, you're trying to go big. And so you can see this company has quite a bit of revenue in the out years. VCs need to invest in companies that can return their portfolio. Like any individual investment needs to be potentially successful enough that it is worth all of the money their investors have given them for all of the companies that they've invested in. Okay, that is the game here. So they're not trying to have you just kind of grow slowly and be small and be successful, but not huge. They would actually prefer that you be risky and try to be huge. And so this is part of the dance that I talked about earlier. And so you are helping the VC understand that you know what the game is. You're trying to go big. You have the chance to be that really big company for them.
Yeah. And if this is your first time raising money, it's worth double clicking on that too. VCs are not a bank. If you are a sure bet, you can definitely give a return. You can go to a bank, get a bank loan, and you can go build your businesses. That's not the industry VCs are in. They're doing super high risk, super interesting investments. And with those interesting investments, they want huge returns. And that's why this slide is super, super important to show that you're in the right lane. You're at least understanding that this is the game you're in. Yeah.
So I think the biggest issues that I've seen here is, first of all, companies are not projecting to be very large. So your software as a service business, and you think you'll have 5 million in revenue after 5 years, but you need to raise $20 million to get there. Nobody wants to invest in that business. It's not going to return their fund. It's not going to be worth enough at the end. That's a common mistake that I see. So, and that's why I really love this slide, because it forcing you to think big and forcing you to help articulate to the venture capitalists that you are playing that game and that you're going to try to be big. Now, we have in this course, we talk about the operating slide in one presentation. We talk about the financial projections in another, and then we actually have a third one where we talk about the financial model and what goes into it. And we have a template model that we're providing as well that you can download. So if you're interested in this, please check out those 3 recordings in that part of the course, and hopefully it can help your startup.
Yep.
Great. And then Now in the 4Ps here, we have the traction. We're ending on the traction slide for 4Ps pretty much because it is a relatively strong
Because
slide.
Yeah.
And what is this one, Chaim? What is the traction
So
slide?
the traction slide really is just what have you done so far, right? I often like to combine it with milestones. It's like, hey, we launched. So this is kind of the looking back, like what have we done to date? So revenue, number of customers, product launches, and so it's a timeline essentially that shows that gives you the chance of talking about what you've done so far, and it pairs with the rest of the deck because the rest of the deck is about future, like what are you planning to do going forward. And the cool thing is by doing it this way, you're able to set yourself up for a really interesting conversation. Now, typically, I would say if you have really strong traction, I would put it at the top of the deck. Now, because of the narrative idea I had here was like, hey, let's end with really strong traction so we can go straight into Q&A next. And then, you basically woken people up, shaken them awake, like, hey, look at this amazing amount of user growth we've had. Look at this fantastic amount of ARR growth, and look at how we're improving at customer acquisition. Now let's talk. And the way you would do the transition there is like, okay, if we had $15 million, we could grow this thing at this clip for the foreseeable future. So you really, it's a storytelling device to help people think about what is about to happen next, which is the Q&A slide.
So a pretty typical joke in the venture capital community is the up and to the right slide, the hockey stick chart. That's what this is here.
Yep.
But what you're doing is you're visually helping the venture capitalist imagine how fast you've grown, and they like to connect the dots. They want to think big. And so they want to see this kind of up and to the right continuing. So to the extent that you have valid metrics around traction of your business, so here we've got revenue and customers, which are pretty much as valid as you get, right? Going up and to the right, have the up and to the right chart. It's really very powerful. I think the issue that some startups have is that they're too early stage. They don't have traction yet, in which case you probably wouldn't really have this slide. You wouldn't need it. Okay.
Totally.
And then we're just going to jump to the final slide that we have, which is this is the slide that is the one that kind of pops up after you finish your presentation and the VCs start to ask questions. Now, in a good pitch, the VCs will have asked a lot of questions along the way. Okay. Yep. But putting that aside, this is the slide that you're going to have up when you start to kick off the Q&A. And Haya, this is one of the things that I think I've taken away from working with you on this is the importance of this slide. I want to talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, I love having like something up that helps guide the conversation, right? And a lot of the time what ends up happening is that you kind of try and bury the bad news. So the slide before this may be your weakest slide. Like if you have a weak team and you're just like, oh yeah, and we have a team, right? You're not really talking about that. The last thing you want is for your weakest slide to stay up while you start Q&A, because guess what you're going to get grilled on, right? So it's a good idea to throw something else up and kind of have this like a pretty picture to look at, or recap, like, hey, we're Salesforce for plumbers or something like that, just to kind of, it's the narrative piece. It's the one thing people take away with them when they walk away. Remind them why they're there, remind them what you're doing.
Set the tone for the Q&A with this slide.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. So that is the order slide and listen slide. We're going to talk a little bit about the comparison of the order of slides. I think we should do a quick detour though into an appendix. Yeah. An appendix is a useful tool that I like to have because if a venture capitalist has a startup founder detailed questions that would be a little distracting to have in the main part of the pitch, you could put that information in the appendix, and then you could just jump to that slide and use it to both visually and sort of basically to guide you on answering that hard question, right? So stuff that I think really goes well in the appendix are detailed financials, detailed marketing or go-to-market plans, staffing growth.
Yeah.
Some other things that are helpful is if there are source materials you have around the market sizing. If you think you might get some feedback around people don't believe the market size, they don't quite understand how you're calculating it. Great place to put that.
Or additional product screenshots, additional photographs, additional graphs data. If you have a complex business model, maybe a breakdown of the different parts of it. If you have a complex sales funnel, a breakdown of the different sales funnel. If you have a very complex blended customer acquisition cost formula, you can break that too. It's like, hey, yeah, some of our channels are expensive, some of them are cheap, some scale better, some scale worse. You don't really want to get into that in the middle of a normal pitch. And there's a very good chance that you'll get a question about it. And if you do, it's very helpful to be able to throw the numbers up, because two things. One, you probably can't remember the numbers off the top of your head. I certainly can't. And I don't want to misinform someone, but I also want to be able to give a good answer. So what I typically have when I pitch for companies and when I work with clients, we typically end up with a slide deck that is around 15 slides long and probably another 15 slides or so in the appendix. Now, if you send ahead the slide deck, you wouldn't include the appendix, but it's just there. So you don't have to switch to another deck. You don't have to switch to another piece of software. You just go boop, 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 and you're right there to show off the bits you need to show off.
It's very powerful for when the VC asks sort of the drill down question or the double click question on one of the topics that you're presenting, to be able to say, wow, that's a really good question. I've thought a lot about that. And then to be able to jump to an appendix slide where we can show them more detail. It's really powerful. It shows that you're very thoughtful.
Yeah. And you don't have to beat yourself up. If you get a question that you don't have an appendix slide for, at the end of that pitch, go home and make one, right? The next time it comes up, you're ready for it. And that's often how these things evolve, right? You get a couple of questions that a lot of people ask. Great, make a better answer for it. Make a slide if you have to. It's an iterative process. You don't make the slide deck once and then never touch it again.
Okay, great. Now that we've talked about the appendix, let's go back and talking about the order of slides again. It's a really important topic. I'm going to share the order of slides for the presentation that we looked through, the 4 Ps. Beer Sub, which is the other example, a startup pitch deck template that we've created, and then the suggested startup pitch deck template, table of contents or order of slides as well. So you can take a quick look and compare them. They're definitely deviated with the 4 Ps a little bit from the suggested order. And I think in particular, we put the team slide back quite a bit, and the traction slide back. I want to talk a little bit about sort of the thought process on like how the story and kind of why you move those slides around a little bit.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time when I work with founders the first time, they've downloaded a template somewhere and they've just crammed all their information into the template. That is great if your story leads itself to that particular order of slides. But what I also learned is that a lot of the time, if you have a particular strength or a particular weakness, no two businesses are the same. And you do need all of this information in a slide, right? If you're trying to do a pitch and you don't say anything about your team or your competition, it's not a good pitch deck. But you don't have to say it in that particular order. And so sometimes there's two slides in particular that gets moved around a lot. It's team and traction. So the team slide, if you have the most incredible team in the world, like if you have 3 PhDs and a bunch of people who have deep industry knowledge, lift it up. That becomes a really good part of your story. You can say, hey, we are the only team who could possibly deliver this. If that is true for you, then tell that part of the story. Same thing with traction. If you have incredible traction, honestly, nothing else matters. That's your second slide right there. Just like, hey, we're growing rapidly. We are delivering. We are growing. The only reason we need to raise money is that we can go faster. At that point, it doesn't matter how good or bad your team is or what your competition is doing, right? Because you are executing the ever living crap out of it. And I think that's the way to think about it. Like, what are the specific strengths and weaknesses for your team, for your company, for your product, for your market, for everything that's happening here? And that's how you tell your story. And that's why the order of these various slide decks are slightly different.
So again, you should feel free to move these around based on how it works for your narrative and your story. It doesn't hurt as you're putting together your presentation to just take one of the templates we have here and just follow that order. And then to think about it, talk through it in your mind, talk through it with your co-founders, talk through it with your existing investors, kind of take the top things and pull them up. But again, remember, team and traction in particular move around quite a bit. And then also be thoughtful around product and demo, how much time you need to allocate to those. Often go through those relatively quickly depending on the stage. And then the other big piece of advice that I want to make sure you take away from this is that make sure you've got an operating plan that's showing what you're producing with the money that you're getting, that you're going to be more valuable, that you're credible. Just definitely think that's incredibly important and highly recommend that.
Yeah. So the cool thing about these different slide decks is that you realize that there's a different number of slides for one thing, and they have a few little differences, right? The Beer Sub slide deck actually has two slides that don't exist in either of the other two. So in this case, the Why Us, slide 6, and Why Now, slide 11 are different. You also note that in the suggested, you have financial projections in both the suggested and 4P, but Beer Sub doesn't have a financial projections. So there's slight differences there. In the beer sub story, the ops plan actually takes the place of financial projections, and in others you might need both. So it varies a little bit. The
Right.
why now slide is particularly interesting to me because it's really trying to place it in time. So what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, there's been a macroeconomic shift that is happening. And within this macroeconomic shift, it's really important to keep in mind that this company could not have existed 20 years ago. And it shouldn't exist 5 years from now. Now is the time. And for some companies, that is super obvious and not important. And for other companies, you have to kind of help set the stage for that. The other one is the why us. So in this case, it's kind of about the moat. It's like, what are we doing here that makes us special? So in this particular story, what I've done is I'm telling a story narrative around why this team is unique and really well positioned to run this company. And then later I'm talking about the specific people in the company and why that is true. Again, they're just little storytelling techniques, but you get to have a little bit of fun with this. You get to have a little bit of wiggle room for how you tell each part of the story. So I guess the overarching point I'm trying to make here is don't get too hung up on the templates or the order. Think about what the story is. Think about, do you need to spend more or less time on something? And if you start getting a lot of pushback for a particular part of your pitch, think about, would an additional slide help or would moving it around help? A while back, I did a company that was all about virtual events. And this was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And so there was a god awful amount of competitors. We had so much pushback on competitors by every investor we talked to, but we were still like, no, we have a really solid reason why it still makes sense for us to start this company. We're not being outcompeted from every angle. This deserves to exist. And as a result, I ended up with 2 different slides about the competition. One was just this big slide taking the entire market of 45 competitors and saying, hey, the vast majority of these you can ignore because they sound like competitors, but they are not. Zoom, yes, you have pictures of humans on the screen and they're talking to each other, but it's not a virtual events platform. It's different. And here's why. And so we basically, we did this scorched earth thing where we took, like, out of the 45 competitors, we reduced the actual competitive field down to about 5, and then I had a second slide that talked about those 5 specific competitors and how we were different. It was really clunky. And in the end, it was the only way I was able to tell that part of the story because it was such a frothy competitive landscape. And so again, you have to somehow get a little bit creative about how to tell the parts of the stories, especially when you get a lot of pushback.
So, yep. So I think the key takeaway there is listen and take that feedback and use it to craft how you're telling your story. So we highly recommend starting with the template. And again, we've got a couple that you can grab just to get the ball rolling, but then go ahead and make changes after you've done that.
Absolutely.
Another important topic to think through as you're crafting your deck is that there are a couple of different axes in how your deck might be different. And one of those is based around your stage. So later stage companies will have slightly different order and emphasis on the slides, and particularly leaning more into numbers. Whereas the earlier stage companies will likely talk more about the story and the plan about how you're trying to figure things out and where you're trying to get to to prove you reach various proof points around product market fit and understanding your sales and marketing channels. So that's one thing to think through. Now we talk about how to think differently about your slides based on stage in the individual conversations. So please check out the individual videos or recordings to go kind of more in depth on each slide to see how they differ. There's another way or another matrix to kind of think differently or about how your deck comes together. Hi, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I often recommend that people actually create 2 different versions of their slide deck. So you have to, I mean, that takes more time to keep in sync and to keep everything up to date. So I would build one first, build your pitch deck, like the actual one you're going to be used for pitching. But then remember, a lot of the time when you build a really good keynote or PowerPoint, it's about the slides back up what you're saying, right? But if you're not doing a voiceover, if you're not talking, it might actually not land as well. So build that deck first, but then think about, if you were to do a send home deck, whether before or after the meeting, is there additional context or information or links or all that kind of stuff you would add to really help the story stand on its own? And I like to, what I typically recommend to my customers is, to my clients, is to have two different decks. One is the presentation deck that you use when you tell your story, and one is the send home deck. Now, the send home deck can have a little bit more words because people are not going to be distracted by the words while you are talking. And you can add links, you can add a little bit of extra context. And it's really helpful to be able to send one and then present from one that looks really similar, but is better for like showmanship. And so think about the medium and the recipient, right? The send home deck, people have a quick skim through and look at the things they're interested in. For the presentation deck, it really is just there to support you in telling your story. So they're subtly different. You don't always need two different ones, but I typically recommend to have two slightly different versions of it, just so you don't lose something in translation when you're sending it to someone.
I think that particularly makes sense if you're going to be doing a lot of prospecting, which is sort of the initial reach outs. You want to make sure that the deck that someone opens up in their email attachment can stand alone and that there's not important context that's lost. When you're presenting, of course, less text on the screen can really be helpful. So just think through what your presentation style is. And remember that if you're putting something on the board that can be read, a lot of time people are going to stop and read it, right? And they may not be listening. So just think through the ratio of how much you want to be delivering verbally versus via text.
Yeah, and the most value you get out of your slides is if you do stuff that you can't do with words. Graphs, pictures, illustrations, charts, any sort of thing that you can't really do as easily in words. Really make sure that the slide deck does the heavy lifting there, because it means that when somebody's looking at it, you can do the voiceover, you can explain why this is important, why this is relevant, and it's just good multimedia storytelling.
Thank you for listening to the first episode of the Kruze Consulting Startup Pitch Deck course. Again, we have gone through every single slide with its own unique episode and recording. We have free templates available. And we also have a free financial model that you can download. All of this is on kruzeconsulting.com/pitch-deck. We hope you found this enjoyable. We'd love to hear feedback. After you've raised your money, of course, please come to Kruze Consulting to get the best accounting, bookkeeping, tax, and financial advice available to venture-backed companies. And Haya, if folks would like some help putting together their presentations, how can they reach you?
I would be absolutely delighted to help. I'm super easy to find. You find me on haya.me. So my name.me has some information about what I do. And there's also a book. So it's available in all good and some terrible bookstores. Go to haya.me/book for that. It's a pretty quick read. It covers a lot of the stuff that that you need to know in order to really pull together a good pitch deck.
Thank you everyone for joining us for this episode. And please check out all the other episodes that we've recorded on every single startup pitch deck slide. Thank you so much.